How to build a decentralized Twitter. Is it even possible? Crypto-based social media will be shaped by existing statutes, regulations, and norms, and may be limited by its tech. Tesla CEO Elon Musk's bid to acquire Twitter has resurrected long-standing discussion in the cryptoverse regarding, at least to date, a largely theoretical product category, decentralized social media. Just as Bitcoin is censorship-resistant money, the theory goes, so too can we use Bitcoin-like infrastructure to run censorship-resistant social media applications. While creating a social media app is trivially easy, running a successful social media business is extraordinarily hard. I should know, back in 2014, Casey, Tyler, and I proposed a DAO, a decentralized autonomous organization called Eris. That was basically a distributed version of Reddit that could run on a blockchain, Ethereum POC3 to be precise. That project failed for a number of reasons, not least because in 2014, the market couldn't tell the difference between a smart contract and a Pop-Tart, as most decentralized social media projects have and will. The problems with attempts to decentralize Facebook are both technological and legal. For one, decentralized applications rarely scale. Facebook generates over 4 petabytes of data per day. That is simply too much information for any serious number of nodes to bother mirroring. Even federated platforms like Mastodon, which ride the line between decentralized Bitcoin and centralized Facebook, run into bottlenecks. That problem I like to also pinpoint to, which we need to solve, is also going to be surrounding all of Web3, not just decentralized social media networks. And the problem really comes down to needing to solve persistent storage. We've harped on that quite a bit, but blockchains solve the problem of censorship at the edges, but are likely too overbuilt and redundant to manage massive global communications platforms. Likewise, it's essential to be able to delete posts from the inane to the hot-headed from platforms like Twitter. Where things get really messy, however, is where technology intersects with the law. Decentralized social media is likely possible, but the form it takes will be shaped by existing statutes, regulations, and norms. Social media companies, as it turns out, are subject to a bevy of regulations. These rules govern the destruction and reporting of illegal content, copyright issues, data protection, and mandatory disclosure of subscriber records, among other things. They also vary by country. All these factors need to be accounted for in a decentralized social media applications design. Now, I would posture that this goes away. All of these problems go away because the nation state dissolves in the wake of the realization of cryptocurrency and its power surrounding it. Now, this comes obviously from the recent book that I've been harping on, The Sovereign Individual, where it discusses the dissolution of course, nation states, because there are too many people, and people will start governing themselves thanks to the digital age that we are experiencing now and that transformation into it. And people will be able to set up their own sets of rules and govern themselves through technologies like Bitcoin. We talked about this a little bit on my Twitter yesterday, so if you're interested, you can head on over there. But the basic idea is you could use improvement proposal standards that we already have in place when we see changes to things like Bitcoin to basically have a blockchain self-governance, and that could happen in the long run as we transform into this digital age. And I think this problem by and large becomes less and less relevant. But of course, we want to keep people safe too, right? That's always going to be one of the arguments. One obstacle for decentralized applications is the problem of unlawful material. In the United States and across the world, the most uniformly illegal content is, of course, child sexual abuse material, or CSAM. Remember, boys and girls, this is not a show for children. as it is referred to by law enforcement. Despite the fact that penalties for knowingly hosting this material are extreme, ranging from heavy fines to lengthy terms of imprisonment, the crypto industry's response to this very long-standing internet problem has more or less been to completely ignore it. Here's the other thing you have to take into account here, though. Just because we have these regulations, and this goes obviously into traditional arguments surrounding illegal activity across the board, whether it be drugs, guns, etc. No matter how many laws you put into place, you cannot control 7 billion people on the planet simultaneously and chase them down. And this is the problem that you have even with the worst of illegal content. Just because we have centralized data centers, etc., doesn't mean that this content isn't being illegally distributed online as it stands. So to use the argument against the technology purely based on this would be, I think, kind of a moot point. It's like, well, it's already being done. It'd just be being done in a different manner, and you'd have to figure out what to do there. Obviously, the public, by and large, would oppose this sort of activity. So if you allow the public to self-govern the blockchain, this could be prevented in a number of different ways. Reddit, Twitter, and Facebook, which host user content, take a proactive approach to eliminating this type of illegal material. Federal law requires electronic communication service providers, likely including both blockchain node operators as well as traditional centralized service providers, to remove CSAM on discovery, securely preserve it for 90 days, and then destroy it. Overseas, where there is no such thing as the First Amendment, even broader categories of unlawful content exist. See, for example, the German blah, 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 or NetzDG, which requires the operators of social media services to register with the government after reaching a certain scale to abide by takedown requests. Now, this is coming to the United States today. We're going to be talking about it because this entire episode is going to be pretty much, other than the Ethereum portion at the end of this, surrounding this idea of utilizing the blockchain to self-govern and to basically open up freedom for the individual and give that sovereignty back to the individual. What we are going to hear today is essentially a ton of arguments against this sort of idea. But in my humble opinion, it's inevitable during this transformation. All right, so the French law number 2020-766 against hate content on the internet, which imposes fines for failing to remove unlawful content, including terrorist content, within 1 hour of posting, or Section 5 of the Defamation Act 2013 in the United Kingdom, which has notice and takedown procedure for alleged defamation similar to the US DMCA. Where services like Reddit and Facebook are very responsive to all the above requests and requirements, blockchain-based services like Storj or Psi, to my knowledge, have no such controls. They permit the storage of encrypted data without the creation of a subscriber record or the means of the service provider, in this case the node operator, to ascertain what data is being stored. And that is how it should be. We should never cave to the fear of illegal activity to give up our privacy and our security. It is probable, and I would suggest even likely, that decentralized data storage services are currently being used to host unlawful content, likely without the knowledge of node operator hosting it. This level of willful blissness will be a complete non-starter for a decentralized social media app, which must be designed in such a way that an otherwise law-abiding user can participate in the network while being secure in the knowledge he or she is not violating local law. Once again, this is, everybody wants to think about the transformation we're going through into this digital blockchain age from an antiquated perspective where we have a governing body that tells us what's okay and what's not okay. you can build tools that allow the users to identify such content and remove it. And like I said, I do believe in the majority being overall good from this perspective. Now, I know a lot of people might disagree with me on that perspective, but I don't think that just because there is a law that it prevents the majority from participating in something completely heinous. I think that in general, humans strive to do good and improve, and I think that we can govern ourselves in this sort of ecosystem. And I do not accept that we have to abide by the old guard to basically have a successful society in the future. I don't think that that's necessary at all, especially if we look at any other age, from the industrial age all the way back to the agricultural age, and the transformations we saw take place then that are not dissimilar from what's going on now, other than, of course, the time of which it's taking to complete, meaning it's moving a lot quicker at this point. So far, no blockchain solution with a storage component even attempts to address this issue. It must be, for nobody will run a node for a decentralized service if doing so risks imprisonment. At some point, I actually think that that will be kind of impossible, right? Because we already see, in a lot of different places, just mining in general being made illegal. I think eventually, China will start trying to block nodes. But at the same time, how are you going to police 7 billion people? You aren't. It's not possible. Similarly, our intellectual property regime is not well suited to use in decentralized fashion. Social media node operators being entities offering the transmission, routing, or providing of connections for digital online communications of material of the user's choosing without modification to the content of the materials as sent or received are service providers for the purposes of the Digital Millennium Copyright Act and publishers under the Copyright Act. They therefore need to consider their own exposure for hosting material which might give rise to copyright infringement claims. Boom! Blockchain's already solving that with NFT. So sit down on your DMCA high horse. We don't need a governing body for DMCA. The users will be able to determine that based off of the records of the NFTs that they have created and the original content creator for that piece of content that's being consumed. Now, of course, there are copyright algorithms, I suppose, or there's copyright software or code that needs to be written to identify this type of thing, but plenty of different NFT platforms have already started working on this. Once again, we don't have to adhere to the old guard in relation to the digital transformation that we are going through. You can think outside of the box, guys. It's also possible copyright trolls will ravage node operators in repeated bad faith attempts to extort small dollar settlements. This might result in decentralized applications that do not support images or videos, being the types of copyrightable subject matter which is most often used by vexatious copyright enforcement law firms at all. It is difficult to speculate what kind of infringements and enforcement one might encounter in a communications medium which does not yet exist. Judging from what we see in Web 2, however, the presence of copyright trolls in Web 3 is a virtual certainty as soon as it becomes profitable for them to be there. Look, give the original content creator back the rights. What you were running was a scheme, a scam. Most of these record companies were running scams and manipulating and taking advantage of people. Web3 will give the power back to the individual. A further issue arises when we consider that a person participating in a decentralized network may, in the course of operating his or her node, acquire large quantities of subscriber data. Node operators may be seen as providers of an electronic communication service for the purposes of the Stored Communications Act, and therefore may be required to hand over records of their computers to the government without a warrant, at least to the extent that those records pertain to third parties that are within a node operator's possession and control. Users are unlikely to want to run a network that invites this degree of intrusion into their personal lives. Applications will need to be designed so that they hold as little third-party data as possible on their nodes. Once again, we kind of go back to the issue of the biggest problem within Web3, which is persistent storage, and how that is solved is going to be, of course, paramount here. All of the issues identified above share one factor in common. Social media requires a degree of censorship and deletion, not immutable, globally shared pools of information. Yeah, in the past, not anymore. Decentralized tech like Bitcoin is designed in such a way as to render deletion impossible or prohibitively expensive. A decentralized Twitter will not, therefore, look anything like Bitcoin. Now, I do agree with that, just basically due to I don't know what persistent storage is going to look like, and I don't know how you get to the point. Look, you can sort of extrapolate the future and what it will sort of look like. Like we've talked about, that idea is going to be the people governing themselves in relation to what is acceptable and what is not acceptable on the blockchain. The tools to do this will be created eventually. Do I have the idea or know exactly how these tools will be created and function down to the actual code base? No, I do not. But I can tell you that that is the path that we begin to take. The need for content removal and moderation, whether due to criminal liability, civil liability, or simply usability, will be the single most important factor in the design of a decentralized social media system. At minimum, the centrality of the content moderation to the social media user experience means that simply dumping everything on the blockchain, as BitClout does, and then replicating it across every single node of the network, as Sam Bankman-Fried may want, with on-chain pointers to IPFS for everything else, is simply not going to work. My hunch is that the first truly successful decentralized social media system will not try to be an all-signing, all-dancing world computer, but rather will have its users replicate the absolute bare minimum viable information required for the network to function. The blockchain piece, if any, should be regulated to the providing a register of usernames and associated public keys and very little else. It will also likely limit the kind of data users host to plain text for the most part. This is a low liability proposition from the perspective of criminal copyright and data protection law. It is also much lighter on bandwidth and will be easier to transmit peer-to-peer. Video and image hosting, simply due to the sheer quantity of data involved, will likely be outsourced anyway, much as it is now. There are plenty of third-party platforms, BitChute, Cozy, Odyssey, that have lax but not non-existent content moderation policies for video content. These could address the gaps in the market currently served by establishment outfits like YouTube. And look, that is one idea. You could utilize AI, or even obviously we have the whole idea of proof of useful work and AI with Flux and Web3. There has to be a way where you can integrate that to where you could vote on the chain to say, hey, look, child porn, bam, use the AI, detect it, take it down. You don't need a governing body to enact that sort of policy. And I think that by and large, by the way, once again, by and large, a majority of the 7 billion people on the planet that would be making the decision would agree on that. What moderation exists would be up to the users. They could control what content they see by operating their own whitelist, blacklist of third-party content providers. Libs could block all the right-leaning sites, and cons could block all the lib media, for example. You can kind of do that already now, right, within Web 2, obviously. Like, you are still a sovereign individual that can determine which content you wish to consume and which content you do not wish to consume. I don't think that that changes with this in particular. The decentralized system would then become just another source of referral traffic to these websites. He says, I could be wrong, of course. Some wonder kind somewhere could, as we speak, be writing a 6,000 word blog post on a ZK dork-proof sharding social media proposal to be built on some all singing, all dancing Ethereum-like Rube Goldberg machine. All right, dude, you're just getting a little carried away, aren't you? That will solve all scaling problems by magic. My hunch, however, is that simpler answers are more likely to be the right ones. Decentralized social media is likely to become more like RSS than Ethereum. Whilst this sketch describes an imperfect solution to the censorship debate, an imperfect solution might nonetheless be a sufficient one. Most of the politically motivated censorship that occurs on Twitter and Facebook is not of images and videos, but of links to third-party websites, the plain text expression of wrongthink, and the digital identities themselves. And that's a good point. You could start purely by having text only, and you eliminate probably, at least, honestly, if it's text only, you probably eliminate 80% of the potential wrongdoing that could be done that most people would agree against. You could start there with the decentralized social media platform. It could be Twitter and back to Twitter when it was 140 characters and that's it. That's all you get. You can write that out. And then all you have to police at that point is going to be things like doxing, etc., harm on individuals. That is all you would have to really take into account, and everything else would be pretty easy. And then you could essentially probably do some sort of vote on chain to automatically basically moderate any sort of doxing that's going on by eliminating the use of private addresses via an AI. Easy. Done. Start there, move to the more complicated stuff like video and photos later on. A solution to censorship problem likely needs to ensure mainly that text, links, and identity are uncensorable. The text and links by being self-hosted and the identity by being immutable. If we frame the problem to that limited set of issues, I think a usable version of decentralized Twitter is achievable in the very near future. And I agree. I think we kind of I disagree on a few things. Like I said, I think we can replace the old guard with a new guard. I think it's going to happen inevitably no matter what. What it looks like exactly, I don't know. But more on this topic, we have Elon wants to authenticate every Twitter user. Crypto Twitter should take notice. Obviously, what we're talking about here is the ability to stay anonymous on social media if you so choose. Now, from my perspective, one of the great things about Twitter as it stood previously was that I had the option to remain anonymous if I so wanted to, as compared to Facebook with its KYC. Of course, outside of IP address information that's going to be obtained and recorded by Twitter as it stands. While you may be thinking, oh great, another newsletter gushing about Elon Musk's mega pact to buy Twitter, that's not where I'm going here. Instead, there's much to unpack in the deal in terms of privacy, free speech, and regulations. Of course, this assumes the deal actually goes through. The narrative: Tesla CEO, SpaceX founder, and Boring Company creator Elon Musk has come to terms with the board of Twitter to acquire the company and take it private. Why it matters. Twitter occupies a fairly important role in public discourse, particularly in crypto. Musk's pending takeover of the social media platform is worth watching, especially for anyone who is actually involved in crypto Twitter. Breaking it down, Elon Musk bought Twitter, almost. So the bird site basically has been largely focused on what the CEO of Tesla buying it means for free speech and bots. Something else caught my eye in the press release announcing the transaction. In a statement, Musk said, I also want to make Twitter better than ever by authenticating all humans. Does this mean Musk wants to get rid of anonymous accounts entirely? And how would this work in practice? It seems that authenticate here would have to mean collecting some form of personal identifiable information, KYC, know your customer, right? If it's as simple as checking a box or filling out a CAPTCHA, that doesn't seem to be so bad. is another story altogether if authentication extends to checking a license or passport or credit card to verify that there is a real human on the other end of the keyboard. The implications of Twitter, which has suffered cybersecurity breaches in the recent past collecting PII, are troubling. In particular, a large number of Twitter's users remain pseudonymous or anonymous for various reasons, ranging from just wanting to troll or harass people to having credible fears of posting under their actual identities. As reporter Melissa Chan points out, governments interested in identifying dissidents or activists may try to leverage influence over Musk in ways they could not influence Twitter itself. A lot of folks may also just not have access to the kind of IDs that might be needed. This authentication solution would have to account for these individuals. You know, blockchain could solve that. I'm sorry. Musk is known for disliking bots and their potential role on social media, and it would make sense for him to focus on that specific issue. Authenticating accounts is one way of addressing that. On the other hand, he also has said that he wants to make open source the algorithms that drive Twitter. In and of itself, this won't change too much. Musk has not committed to making the data that Twitter's algorithms use to drive their decision-making process public. He better. I'm just saying. It's the only way this really works for me. And that's probably where the real digital gold lies. On the other hand, it's hard to reconcile clamp down on bots with here's the source code. Open source apps usually are easier to make bots for, says someone I know. Well, that is true. Closing the transaction. The other question I have is whether the Securities and Exchange Commission has a role here. And this brings me back to the asterisk from earlier. Musk hasn't actually bought Twitter yet. He and the Twitter board have agreed to a transaction whereby Musk will acquire Twitter and take it private. This could take up to 6 months, according to Twitter CEO Parag Agrawal. Plenty could happen in that time, including Musk changing his mind, which, let's face it, isn't exactly out of the realm of possibility. You see, this is the boilerplate language in the addendum to the Form 8K filed to the SEC. Quote, additional risks and uncertainties include those associated with the possibility that the conditions to closing of the transaction are not satisfied, including the risk that required approvals from Twitter stockholders for the transaction or required regulatory approvals to consummate the transaction that are not obtained. We'll be getting into this some more, okay? The form also cites the potential for litigation and the ability of each party to consummate the transaction. In other words, if shareholders sue, or regulators, I suppose, or if it turns out Musk can't leverage his equity or whatever, the deal could be called off. However, those scenarios don't seem likely based on some informational conversations I've had so far. There's also the question of the Form 13G. I believe, by the way, what he's talking about there is if either or fails, they owe the other one $1 billion. So really, Twitter's in a position where it's already going to have earning reports dive down. And if they have those earning reports are showing low, and then they have another $1 billion in expenses for not accepting and continuing through with the deal with Elon, they could have a major dip in their stock price, which would then, of course, open them up to lawsuit from their shareholders. So that's really where it's kind of cornered. There's also a question of the Form 13G that Musk originally filed. That form is for passive investors who will take no active role in trying to influence the company. Musk later filed a 13D, which does indicate an intent to actively influence the platform, but the SEC will likely have some questions about the order of events here. Speaking of regulators, the European Union wasted no time in reminding Musk of its own view on social media and digital data. Per my colleague Jack Schnickler, Brussels was quick to warn Musk that he would be subject to the EU strictures. And the thing is if you're going to be promoting free speech, the US is in a unique position for you as a company to allow for that on your platform. But there are other countries that are not going to be that way. What is the US now, of course, already starting to work on as soon as this deal starts going through and there's a threat of freedom of speech on a social media platform? What happens right away? Disinformation board by the US government. You know why? Because they want the power that other countries already have. Quote, be it on cars or social media, any company operating in Europe needs to comply with our rules, regardless of their shareholding, end quote, tweeted European Commissioner Thierry Breton. He referred to the Digital Services Act, a newly cast law that requires social media and other online platforms to account for their algorithms, take down unlawful content, and protect rights. Considering Musk has practically made it a side hustle to tweak the noses of regulators, his purchase of a high-profile media platform that will put him squarely in the sights of those same regulators is as ironic as it promises to be entertaining past the popcorn. I also want to point this out. Go listen to the Sovereign Individual. It specifically says this type of thing will start happening, where the nation states will struggle in competition with individuals that are autonomous. These are individuals that, thanks to, of course, their position within society from a financial level, are able to start influencing, are able to start making decisions and force them to actually change the way that they function. Nation states will have to start functioning at lower and lower levels. They won't be able to have wide governing bodies. It's going to be hard. This is part of the transformation. Now, it could be 10 years, 20 years, 30 years down the line, probably 70 years down the line from the beginning of this transformation if we had to wait it all the way out. But that is what will start happening according to that book, which is interesting. Now, we could say that that is tinfoil hat, sure. But I find it crazy that this is actually something that's going on. Apparently, the Federal Reserve nominees haven't actually been voted on by the Senate yet. My bad, I thought this happened weeks ago. Votes are expected this week. So there you go. I got onto the wrong one. That's the end of that article. I was like, this doesn't even make sense. I hope you enjoyed this clip from the Crypto Mining Morning Show every Monday through Friday, 7:45 a.m. Pacific and 10:45 a.m. Eastern Time. You can check out more clips here, or if you're interested in checking out the entire live show, you can check that out down here. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next Tuesday.